On va enchaîner avec la suite de nos masterclass, la 4e masterclass. Là aussi, agir ensemble, c'est la clé. Agir ensemble et au niveau européen doit aussi permettre d'adresser des problématiques en matière de cancer qui manquent souvent d'écho, qui manquent souvent de moyens à l'échelle nationale. Et c'est le cas notamment des cancers pédiatriques. Une réglementation européenne dédiée a été adoptée, les taux de survie ont été améliorés et pourtant l'accès au traitement reste difficile et pourtant la recherche dédiée est encore largement insuffisante. Alors comment apporter de meilleurs médicaments aux enfants et comment agir ensemble pour cela? Pour en parler, nous accueillons, il est en duplex avec nous, l'un des meilleurs spécialistes de cette question à l'échelle européenne, Dominik KARRES est avec nous. Dominik KARRES, do you hear me?
I can hear you very well. Hello.
Okay. So Professor of Oncology, Scientific Officer, Pediatric Medicine Officer at the European Medicine Agency. I will leave you the mic for a presentation of your priorities, or the vision you have of priorities of action in pediatric cancer. But maybe before, just a short question more dedicated to you and your involvement in that pediatric field. It's not always the easiest field of research and the easier field of medicine to address when you're a researcher or a doctor, actually. What decided you to go in pediatric medicine, and what decided you after that to join the AMA, the IMA?
Thank you. Thanks a lot for the very kind introduction. First, it's a real pleasure to be, with you, albeit due to the pandemic, for me only remotely, very unfortunately. I'm not a professor of pediatrics. I'm a medical doctor, but nonetheless, to your question, I think what always stood out for me was the sort of collaborative spirit and the sort of working together across disciplines, across Europe and the world, which really attracted me towards working in pediatric oncology. And as my career evolved, sort of realizing that the regulatory sort of framework through the pediatric regulation, and I will touch on that during my presentation, it is really an important sort of catalyst and wanting to make a small difference from within, if you wish, to really benefit all children in Europe with cancer was the initial sort of motivation to join the European Medicines Agency. Before starting my presentation, also a huge thank you to the organizers for the very kind invitation and the opportunity really to reflect as part of this masterclass on EMA initiatives to foster pediatric oncology drug development. And I hope you can see my presentation. As part of my short presentation, I would like to briefly sort of go through the why. Why is it so important to get better in making innovation available to children with cancer, including the challenges we all face, followed by the how, exemplified by certain concrete activities we support and initiate at the EMA under three key pillars, which I will explain further before coming to some concluding remarks. So why do we need to get better in making innovation available to all children with cancer in Europe? As you all know, and we've heard that, childhood cancer really remains the #1 cause of childhood death by disease in children over the age of 1. And we haven't had much progress in increasing survival rates over the past decades and have therefore a remaining high unmet medical need really for better and safer treatment options. This is in addition to many drugs still being used off-label, so without any robust data on pharmacokinetics, safety, and efficacy. And addressing this was really the objective of the pediatric regulation, which came into force in 2007 and governs our research and development R&D decision-making as part of the so-called pediatric investigation plans, or PIPs, and has certainly and clearly changed and improved the landscape of pediatric oncology drug development. To give you some numbers, before the regulation, there were only 3 centralized products authorized in Europe in pediatric oncology. Since 2007 until end of last year, there are 16 products authorized, of which 10 are based on pediatric investigation plans. However, and I think that's important to recognize, there remains an inequality in terms of access to innovation compared to adults. That is, in terms of delay in time between first in adult and first in child studies of innovative products, but also in terms of time between initial adult marketing authorization and a pediatric indication. And when comparing the 16 pediatric indications authorized since 2007 to the adult denominator of around 160 authorizations granted in that time frame, I think this becomes even more clear. So there really is a remaining challenge to be addressed in research and development priorities and access to innovation for children with cancer. What are the challenges we need to address in order to improve this situation, which I hope also gives you an understanding already now of how and with whom we need to work. Looking at it from a drug development perspective, whether this is an academic or a commercial developer or researcher, this usually starts with the conceptual challenge of, is a product based on its mechanism of action really able to address an unmet medical need and in which population? Leading to the next question of what's the most appropriate study design, within that population, generating best possible data to support access. And finally, how do we operationalize such development in as many countries as fast as possible, appreciating really all the different regulations and regulatory frameworks under which to work. I hope you can appreciate with that in order to address these challenges, we really have to work together. From a regulatory perspective, when discussing drug development proposals as part of pediatric investigation plans, as I mentioned, governed through the pediatric regulation, we have to acknowledge, given the rarity of the disease and the diseases, it's usually a global endeavor, and that our decision-making should not take place in isolation and out of context, while at the same time, we as regulators are not able to prioritize, and that is really taking into consideration that very often there are many products available for development for a certain disease or within a class, but only very few patients available globally. And at the same time, acknowledging that the regulatory agreement on a PIP and the subsequent approval is only really one step in the overall chain of decision-making, leading eventually to access for patients. To disentangle all these challenges and complexities, I think we need to collaborate and work together within the spirit of shared responsibilities. And by we, I really mean all stakeholders involved in the process. We need to engage to ensure developments are prioritized for the most promising product to be evaluated first, where the unmet need is highest. Decided based on science, I think that's key. Ensuring that such studies are then designed adequately to address and to generate the best possible data for decision makers, not only regulators, but also health technology assessment bodies, HTAs, and that these studies are then initiated timely and without unnecessary delay and available to all. I hope, again, you appreciate that we all play a distinct role here and have a distinct responsibility in order to achieve our overall objective to really increase timely access to innovation for children with cancer. Now, with that in mind, let me move to the how. How do we at the EMA address the issue and foster focused R&D efforts within the existing regulatory frameworks? And I would like to group the EMA Initiative C into 3 key pillars: supporting multi-stakeholder engagement, strengthening international regulatory cooperation, and building capacity. And all the 3 pillars really building on initiatives which include the theme of collaboration and cooperation. Starting with the first, multi-stakeholder engagement, Pediatric Oncology Strategy Forums organized by Accelerate, a multi-stakeholder platform in close collaboration with the EMA, really have become an important backbone of successful multi-stakeholder engagement in pediatric oncology, strongly supported by the agency. The first forum was held end of 2017, and we're now approaching an anniversary with its 10th meeting planned for October this year, hosted at the EMA premise. Really created.
Sorry, we lost the slides actually. So,
oh,
yeah, we were just at the first pillar. Yeah, we can.
Good.
Yes.
Can you see it back? Perfect.
We're back to Accelerate.
Excellent, lovely. That's great. So pediatric oncology strategy forums have really become an important backbone of successful multi-stakeholder engagement in pediatric oncology. And as said, you know, in October we are approaching the 10th meeting and are hopefully able to host it at the EMA premise. And these forums were really created to facilitate early dialogue, provide a safe space for science-driven discussions between all stakeholders on product developments, either within a certain disease or class of compounds, with the objective to prioritize based on the ability of an innovation to address unmet medical needs, and the ultimate goal, this leading to focused and sequential development efforts across compounds and across companies, really to enhance acceleration and using all the available resources in the interest of the patients. And over the past years, together, we and with me, I really mean all stakeholders involved, have shown that these discussions are able to catalyze innovation. Examples here are 2 platform trials in pediatric AML, the PEDAL or UPAL initiative, and in mature B-cell malignancies, the GLOBE-NHL platform, 2 platform studies sponsored by academia, with involvement of multiple companies, really offering an opportunity to ensure the most promising agents are prioritized for development in these rare populations with high clinical need. And I'm happy also to be able to share with you that both platforms had EMA scientific advice and qualification advice respectively already. Discussions also enabled finding consensus on what would be considered standard of care in certain populations, such as certain relapsed refractory disease settings, supporting global development, a global participation in respective clinical trials for these patients, and also an important sort of step forward. But most importantly, you know, from a regulatory perspective, it enabled prioritization discussions between academia and industry, which are subsequently and have shown subsequently to be able to support regulatory decision-making on mandated development plans governed by the pediatric regulation. And prioritization here really being an exercise which is, you know, acknowledged needing to continue beyond initial discussions, but need to be a living exercise, as of course evidence evolves over time, and that's something, you know, which is, for example, embedded also in the concept of the GLOBE-NHL platform trial. Coming to the next pillar of international regulatory cooperation, again, bearing in mind pediatric oncology drug development is usually a global endeavor, and acknowledging the need for developers to really fulfill certain pediatric regulatory requirements globally, emphasized again through recent changes in the US regulation, there's a clear need for further international regulatory cooperation using well-established existing infrastructures, such as the monthly cluster calls taking place between regulatory agencies from the US, Canada, Australia, and Japan. And together with our colleagues in the US Food and Drug Administration, FDA, we called for simultaneous submission of mandated development plans in pediatric oncology, and subsequently published a joint reflection on what we consider common issues we came across as insufficient when reviewing development plan applications, really all with the intent to facilitate early focused discussions of proposed developments of novel agents at our monthly pediatric cluster calls, with the objective to foster regulatory coordination on global development efforts. And acknowledging the differences in the regulations between the US and Europe, nonetheless, importantly, something which we do not consider being a hurdle for such coordinated discussions between regulators. And strengthening, such early discussions between regulators can really assure timely initiation of early phase studies and a coordinated approach to later phase developments globally. And since publication, we have seen this already been taken up by industry over the last year at a number of cases. Coming to the last pillar, which I summarized broadly with capacity building, reflecting now more on initiatives across functions of the network in place to really support R&D efforts and regulatory science evolution in general, but which I believe are equally important and provide synergies, clearly also benefiting pediatric oncology drug development. And I've just listed a few here, so this is by no means an exhaustive list of initiatives and pathways through which the agency supports developers, such as the Innovation Task Force or the more formal scientific advice, but initiatives which directly address challenges of clinical research in children by really building capacity in a collaborative approach. And to name here, the European Network of Pediatric Research at the EMA and PRIMA, which aims to facilitate studies in order to increase the availability of medicines for children. For example, recently just published a recommendation for trial preparedness, reflecting on considerations for trial sponsors facilitating more timely completion of pediatric clinical studies. Of course, I have to mention the clinical trial regulation, which came into application just a few days ago on the 31st of January, harmonizing the submission, assessment, and the supervision of clinical trials in Europe with its backbone, the clinical trial information system, a single entry point for sponsors and regulators for submission and assessment of clinical trial data, including a search function for healthcare professionals, patients, and the general public, really part of a broader initiative to transform the clinical trial environment in Europe. And in that context, to also mention the Accelerating Clinical Trials in the EU, ACT-EU initiative, launched by the European Commission, the heads of medicines agencies, and the EMA to further develop Europe as a focal point for clinical research. And I believe contributing really towards facilitating broader and more timely access to innovation for patients. Appreciating the need for harmonized and robust data collection beyond clinical trials, acknowledging or including long-term safety data collection, really to improve our knowledge of biology, diagnosis, or treatment outcomes, which should eventually be fit for purpose to also support regulatory and HTA decision-making, is, I think, a key area for capacity building in pediatric oncology. Some would call this generating and using real-world evidence. To further support this in general, the agency recently provided support for the establishment of high-quality registries. And following on to this theme, the agency published a list of regulatory science research needs based on identified existing gaps that need to be addressed to further enable access to innovation. And amongst this list are research topics, such as supporting the conduct of targeted studies to advance pediatric medicinal product development through characterization of natural history, identification of genotypic and phenotypic subpopulations, or to advance the understanding of operating characteristics of Bayesian methods. Both, I think, in times of increasing biomarker-driven developments leading to even more, smaller subpopulations, something of great importance to be worked on for pediatric oncology. And lastly, I think none of what I reflected on under the three pillars can be really achieved without all relevant actors being familiar with the specificities of pediatric oncology drug development, but also the regulatory environment in which pediatric oncology drug development is conducted within Europe and globally. And this is something, you know, we address through dedicated educational activities within the regulatory network as part of our EU Network Training Center, EU NTC, but also by being involved actively in educational initiatives led by academia, for example, by being part of a curriculum of a pediatric oncology masterclass, but also, you know, as part of educational activities driven by Accelerate. And to finally conclude, we continue to strongly support and build on the success of multi-stakeholder discussions, particularly but by pushing not only to consolidate, but also by pushing to broaden it to also include health technology assessment bodies, really appreciating, as reflected earlier, that the regulatory approval is just one step to access. Because we would like to ensure that we agree on mandated development plans which generate the best possible data to ultimately also support access decision making. And personally, I believe multi-stakeholder engagement will remain a key pillar for success, and that's really regardless of how a revised pediatric regulation will look like in the future. And we have built a strong relationship with our US colleagues at the US FDA, and we will continue to deepen it, and acknowledging, of course, the differences there are of the respective regulatory frameworks under which we operate. But we see this as a starting point only, and would like to broaden it up to systematically also include other regions into our content discussions. And lastly, I think there's a strong appreciation that we need to continue building capacities together and continue to be open to engage, to evolve science further and share knowledge build and provide fit-for-purpose support to all involved to really bringing innovation to children with cancer faster. And we at the agency are very much committed to doing so within our remits, and we have taken up this responsibility, I believe, under the 3 pillars as I've sort of outlined, and are committed to continue building on it in the future. And I'm seeing a small mistake here. I have to apologize for that. This should read engagement with patient, parents, researchers, developers, and clinicians. But with that, I would like to thank you all very much for the attention and look forward to the discussion.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. We can applaud your presentation, and it shows really well how much of this pediatric field is an excellency for collaboration and in the stakeholder discussion, in the regulator discussion, and in the research community and care actor involvement and collaboration as you show it. We will take questions from the audience in that room, but also from the connected audience. And just recalling that you can send message, you can send a question as much as you want. We will try to address them as much as possible to Dominik, and we will have some times for that. But maybe just a few questions before going to the audience. If I ask that question primarily, it was also because it's important that you express from your personal experience how much this field is a field with a collaborative approach as the soul, I mean, of work in pediatric. As you told me, it's a field of action where you have not much revenue, where you had a quite limited regulation, so you have no other issue than collaborating actually. And so it happened a lot. Accelerate is a major and impressive example of collaboration. The new regulation is going to come in a few months. What kind of frame this collaborative dynamic existing for years, for giving solution to the absence of regulation sometimes, to the absence of funding sometimes? What frame this collaborative disposal like Accelerate should take in that new regulation? And will that new regulation change the priorities of this collaborative structure existing?
Thanks. That's a very good question with sort of lots of different themes in. I think, as I said, I think regardless of how a regulation or how the future regulation will look like, I think multi-stakeholder engagement will continue to remain key and the only way to success. Equally, you know, I think I'm not in a position to comment in terms of, you know, how a regulation sort of then eventually should look like. But I think from you know, what we've learned through experience is that, you know, there's a need for a stick and a carrot. You know, otherwise I don't think we will see innovation in areas, as you said, where there's no real money to make. And the stick and the carrot sort of will need to be balanced and targeted well to really enhance development efforts in therapeutic areas with no sort of, you know, real market, like in pediatric oncology. And you know, sometimes I would have wished that under the, you know, that the starting point to discuss, you know, pediatric development efforts in oncology would not be the adult condition. Sometimes I, you know, would have wished that this would be truly mechanism of action based. And I think, you know, that together, you know, appreciating that and sort of acknowledging that, and taking that in addition to other sort of, you know, funding initiatives, particularly with regard to clinical research, you know, is I think really important in order to move the field forward here, and with the key challenge, I think, to ensure that all the research activities, you know, through all the different streams, you know, whether that's public funded, through public-private partnerships, you know, or you know, and or done to fulfill regulatory requirements, and therefore also an interest of industry to participate and contribute. I think that all these different streams are complementary, and that we, you know, ensure that they provide synergies to really moving science forward here without duplicating.
The moment is an important moment for pediatric in oncology, because there's the revision of this regulation coming. There's also a lot of dynamic ongoing, as you said, but it's also a time of new challenges. And one of these challenges is the rising consideration of long-term sequels, because the children with cancer, once cured, comes to be adults, and that they can have sequels, but decades afterwards. And how to follow them, how to prevent these sequels at the most. This is a new challenge for the oncopediatric community. What is needed now the most to address and to prevent these long-term sequels?
That's a very important point you make, and a very important issue. And I think it's you know, I think it's something where we should you know, get together and through really further coordination and collaboration between all relevant stakeholders. And what I mean with that is really building on and further developing fit-for-purpose long-term safety follow-up registries, and sort of ensuring that you know, this is done within an environment allowing us to connect infrastructures, to share data, allowing us to develop common data elements, and you know, then ensuring that data collected are fit for purpose. And when I say fit for purpose, you know, for everyone, at most the patients, as well as all other stakeholders. And here, you know, thinking as a regulator, you know, such long-term safety data generated over years and decades should also be able to support, pharmacovigilance-related decision-making, which are, also mandated requirements for industry. And I'm mentioning this because I think, we don't want to duplicate work and efforts. Again, I think we should be able to come together and create a solution where all can benefit from.
Questions to Dominik from the audience in the room, and if you can present yourself firstly. Thanks.
Yes, thank you.
The first time it doesn't work, and after the mic is working.
And you push it and it's okay. Gilles Vassal from Gustave Roussy. I think there is a message from the excellent talk by Dominik KARRES, beyond pediatric oncology. Behind the word multi-stakeholder engagement, there is a message, yes, it is feasible to work together, industry, regulatory people, patient advocates, survivors, and academia, in a way that we can move the needles. And it does not apply only to pediatric oncology. We are just showing that it is feasible and it is of value. And this morning you had discussion with Denis Lacombe as well, where clearly this is a message. There are issues, not everything, but some topic that needs to be addressed all together if we want to move this towards for the sake of the patients. And I think this is, for me, an important message from Dominik, because you are not in the room, childhood cancer expert and so on. The only message we pass is it is feasible, it is of value, and we can really move the needle. And the other thing that we are very pleased now with that we are working with health technology assessment, because this is the next barrier. It's good to have drugs approved for children with cancer, not enough, and we need a new pediatric regulation to improve, accelerate the development of the right drugs, but we also need to address how this medicine will be accessible, affordable, available across Europe for all children. And this is the next barrier, as mentioned by Dominik, that we are starting to work with HTAs. And this is very important because it will be in the new HTA regulation. It is not only for pediatric cancer, but it will concern everyone. And I think there is a real opportunity in the field of oncology really to look at how to best work with HTA as well.
As to be known that half of the national cancer plan in Europe don't have pediatric chapter in their
You're absolutely right. One of the issues is that mobilization commitment at the member state level, including in each national cancer control plan, a chapter, a plan dedicated to children and young people, because we are looking at children, adolescents, and young adults.
Questions in the room to Dominik, if there are some. There's questions also online, and you can just feel free to send me questions. I read the questions. We've seen that against COVID, clinical trials were so fast, even for children. How can we accelerate childhood clinical research against cancer? That's a large question.
Indeed, but I mean, very important. And I hope I have sort of tried to and I hope I gave you some sort of examples here. I think it's collaboration, as I said. Under the umbrella of sort of capacity building infrastructures, and I think here the new clinical trial regulation, will really hopefully also contribute in that regard in the future. But I think it's working together and using what is available there in terms of potential synergies, reach out and I think then there are ways to really make a difference in that regard.
There's in that multi-stakeholder collaboration, one very specific yet very important actor in pediatric. It's the patients, because the patients are mainly not the patients, but the parents of the patients. And they played an important role in all this, the building and the animation of all these collaborative dynamics, actually. What's your point of view? What's their major contribution to the evolution of the situation and the treatments in pediatric oncology, and what can be done to integrate them more than they are now on?
Yeah, I mean, to your first part of the question, I think a very short answer. I think patient and parent involvement is so key to what we do, to level set us on a regular basis, to remind us all about our common objectives and why we, do this and why we should do this and why there is this societal obligation to really get better in curing all children with cancer. And that's something I've personally experienced always as very important throughout the years. And to your second question, how could they be more integrated? I think patient and parents should, I think, be more systematically included in development activities, but particularly in protocol development, for example. And that's already happening a lot in pediatric oncology, but I think that there's still room for improvement and to get better. And in that regard, coming back to the clinical trial regulation, there now, as part of submitting your protocol, that there will be the question: have you engaged patient and parents when designing your protocol, your patient informations, and so on and so forth? So I think that's really something which I hope will further catalyze much more the systematic sort of inclusion of patient and parents in that regard.
Are there some other questions in the room? Oh, there's one question on the internet. There is still the need to use a lot of label in pediatric oncology. Can you comment on the efforts to get them on label, despite sometimes the non-collaboration of the company that holds the MA?
Thanks. Very specific question. There is indeed an obligation for marketing authorization holders to submit to the EMA data from completed studies as part of so-called Article 46 for the agency, then to assess these data to see that these are included into the label. But this is sort of industry-sponsored studies. So yes, absolutely. I think that there continues to be a need to collaborate, so that really all data generated as part of clinical research becomes available to prescribers and patients eventually.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot to you, Dominik KARRES. We can applaud you very much. On peut applaudir très fort Dominik KARRES.